Welcome to Mind Your Mind podcast. I am Roxana Parra Sepúlveda, your host, and today my guest is Pascale Gayford. For the last 5 years, she has been working at Refugee Action in the Good Practice and Partnerships team. That team works mainly externally with around 250 organizations each year, supporting them to connect and develop services and share learning practice, which is rooted in access to justice and early action, informed by meaningful engagement with experts by experience, sector insight, and human and community-centered design. Pascale has a lifelong interest in identity, belonging, and culture, and have an MA in Intercultural Relations from the Universities of Kent and Lille. She has been working and volunteering in the asylum and refugee sector since 2005 and have held casework, coordinator, and management positions. Pascale is a trustee of Solace Leeds, which provides well-being and mental health support for refugees and asylum seekers in Yorkshire and the Humber. But I know also, Pascale, that you sing in an unofficial choir. Is that right?
Yeah, I joined with some local friends. We set up a very informal singing group. I guess the best way to describe it is a choir, but really it's a time every Tuesday where we meet to sing together. And it's really great for well-being and a feeling.
Yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. So welcome. And I'm so happy to have you here. I've been looking forward to have this conversation and get everybody to know about the Wellbeing Discovery Project. Because I'm really keen on all the work that you are doing and what are the outcomes of this. So we will be talking about this project. But the first very thing that I want to ask you is what is the Wellbeing Discovery Project and what motivated it?
Well, first of all, just wanted to say thank you so much, Roxana, for having me on your podcast to talk about the Wellbeing Discovery Project and to reaching out to the Wellbeing Working Group, and also your interest in collaborating around this theme, because I think there's really mutual kind of shared interest in the importance of personal well-being and organizational well-being, and thinking more about, systemic well-being and how we can improve it. And that's evidenced through kind of your aim of the podcast as well. So it's been great to connect through the report.
Fantastic. Yes, I was so happy when I saw the report and I thought, these people needs to be in the podcast. Who are they? Where are they? And so I dared to send you an email, Pascale, and I'm grateful for your presence here and your willingness to have this conversation, because I think it's essential. And yeah, it's about that, no? The systemic approach to the solution. The podcast come as a mean of a solution, but I feel more and more while doing this work that we do aim to encourage with the podcast. I do aim to encourage people that are frontline workers to develop their meaningful self-care strategies, right? For them to start to realize that it is important, is essential for the continuing of their careers and their life, really, in a fulfilling way. But I'm also realizing that more and more we are dealing here with a systemic problem, and that we can we need to sort of bring into the conversation as well the organizations and everybody involved with decision-making responsibilities within the organizations, to start to think about how we encourage that well-being from within as well. No, yeah. So tell us about the Wellbeing Discovery Project. Let's get started with that first.
Great. Okay. So I suppose starting with a bit of background and context. So as you said, Roxana, our team works with about 250 organizations. And I think it's not, we all know that well-being is an issue and has always been an issue. But if we go back to the beginning of the pandemic in 2020, our team set up an insight hub, which and the insight hub sends out a regular survey to organisations across the sector to understand changing needs. So it's set up in the pandemic because all organisations needed to adapt, and throughout the life cycle of the Insight Hub, which has been going for 3 years, wellbeing has been a very consistent theme.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, coupled with our understanding from our partnership programs in terms of how organisations were adapting, moving their services online, especially around what that meant about wellbeing for service users, but also staff, meant that it was always an issue that we were thinking about. And over the course of 3 years, there were a couple of interventions in terms of training cycles, but always coupled with interventions is that it's not going to change things necessarily in the long term, training alone. And then in 2022, we did a survey which revealed that 76% of organisations were surviving in terms of well-being. With the most
and what that mean? What does it mean that they're surviving?
That they're surviving, that I suppose that they know it's an issue that they're not addressing. So not necessarily that they feel that they're drowning in it, but it's something that is pervasive and that it's there and it needs addressing. And the most common issues being overwork, financial worries, stress, and anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we wanted to do more. We wanted to look at what does this mean, and potentially what are organisations actually experiencing, because with surveys you don't get much depth, you know it's an issue. So the aim of the Wellbeing Discovery Project was to go deeper and understand more about it. So what are the issues? And are there any potential solutions to this ongoing growing problem of wellbeing that's also growing alongside the issue of the rising hostile environment, and that is kind of rising all the time, and global crises and wars, which are also affecting people in the sector in terms of being able to maintain their well-being.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because this notion of surviving with the issue of well-being, no, and what comes to mind for me with this is that the very reason why well-being can be an issue and is expected somehow to be an issue is in the sense of that we are working with trauma, and we know that when we are supporting others that are survivors of traumatic experiences, it's inevitable that the staff within organization, everybody that is involved in supporting them and interacting directly with them and providing that containment, will then eventually be impacted by emotional exhaustion, secondary traumatization. So it also comes from the angle, what I'm saying comes from the angle that of the need of working from a trauma-informed approach, no? That maybe, I don't know how integrated is, but also I wonder if that's part of the issue as well, no?
Absolutely. I suppose that issue has always been there in the sector, because the sector works with refugees and asylum seekers.
Yeah, it's the nature of the work. I mean, it's like a hazard, a work hazard, no?
Absolutely. And that, I think, is certainly part of the puzzle. I guess that, coupled with the COVID pandemic, the cost of living crisis, the hostile environment, and the kind of broken asylum system, combined together to create kind of like a really difficult set of circumstances to operate within. And therefore, that's why it's so systemic. So it's not just about having a trauma-informed approach, but
No.
potentially it's about all the other things that need to come alongside it organizationally to be able to kind of move through or kind of continue to support the people that organizations are set up to support.
Absolutely. And what do you think are the most relevant findings of the project?
Well, I suppose just to go back a bit in terms of thinking about the aim before we get to the findings.
Yes.
So the aim was to kind of take this issue and think about going deeper, and for it to be a bit of a kind of conversation starter. And as we've both said, you know, it appears to be a systemic issue, but I think partly what made the project unique is that we tried to bring together a kind of elements of co-production with community-centered design, and the process was as important as the findings in terms of how we were trying to involve people in the project and inform the work. So what that meant was it was very important for us that it was kind of a sector, as far as possible, it was held by the sector. So we set up planning quite a while before delivery. We set up a kind of strategic group to think about what else was going on, making sure we weren't duplicating, figuring out which organizations we were going to reach out to that had previously responded to surveys that said that they wanted to do more around wellbeing. We wanted to make sure the organizations we were working with had good lived experience representation. We also wanted to make sure we were working with experts with both learned and lived experience in terms of wellbeing throughout the project process. So that kind of process of how we designed and delivered the project was, I feel, as important as the findings, because it's important that it's kind of collectively held. And,
absolutely.
And also in terms of solution, we need to also, you know, that needs to be, as I think the answers are approached to wellbeing, these need to be co-produced. We need to have an understanding of the different elements and experiences of the system to figure out how to change things or how to create new ways of working so that wellbeing is prioritized, rather than kind of putting up with the way we're working as just, oh, that's the way it is, I suppose.
Absolutely. And talks about that approach, talks about the importance of being involved in the process, to be part of the solution from the very beginning, no? And starting and facilitating as well that reflective process, and sense the element of awareness, of self-awareness, that is part of getting into a point where one can say, okay, probably for my organization or for this sector in particular, these are the needs, and therefore this could be the solutions or the potential options for people to, and organizations to start to implement well-being strategies for their staff and so on. Yeah, the co-construction of the process is a meaningful aspect of it.
Yeah, I really think that's important, and that any solutions need to be built from either bottom up or co-developed. So really thinking about who's designing any solutions that will actually work for well-being.
Yeah. And it's interesting because it's making me think about the same approach that I am taking when I'm talking about encouraging frontline workers to develop their own meaningful self-care strategy. You know, it needs to be meaningful, because it's about getting to know yourself, it's about getting to understand what are your particular stressors, and from there, and that requires that element of self-awareness. And the only way that I see, because the only way I see really something that is related to well-being will be useful is if that is meaningful for the person for their own needs, for their own characteristics, and I think we are talking about the same but in different levels, no? In terms of the organizations also understanding their field, the people that they are working with, and how that can impact on the staff as well. And that makes me think about a question that I have been wondering around for a while now. I don't know what you think. Do you think that we are talking about the migration sector, no, organizations that are supporting refugees and people that have migrated for different reasons, but do you think the sector, because in particular this sector has specific needs, or if I am a worker in this particular sector, I may be impacted in a particular way, as if, for example, it will be different for someone working in the sector of trafficking, or in the Vogue sector, and the violence against women and girls sector, and so on. That I'm wondering about that.
So there were three, in terms of like the findings from the research, spoke to like 18 people in the sector in different roles and different positions.
Okay.
And we looked at the findings, and in terms of the findings that came up most across all the interviews, one of them was that the sector is in some ways unique.
Okay.
And as you say, so I think what we're looking at is that many of the things, the wellbeing issues that were shared, are also shared across other sectors. However, some of the things that are unique in the sector, as I've already said, very, very high percentage of the people that frontline workers are working with are incredibly traumatized, which is going to have an effect on anyone working with them. But we are working with the asylum system, and this system is broken. As we know, over the last year, the backlog of asylum cases is growing and growing. It's a functioning system. So as well as working with traumatized people, we're also working with a system that does not work, and it's very difficult for people to move through the system. And added to that, the rise in the hostile environment, which is specifically targeted at asylum seekers and refugees in a very deliberate way from the government, and what that means for people working in the sector. So kind of working with people in more and more impossible circumstances. And I think also, and possibly most importantly, many people working in the sector have lived experience of the refugee process themselves. And so this is going to be, but for different reasons, this is incredibly difficult for those people. So I think, so that was one main theme about the sector being unique. But then thinking about people with lived experience, the findings found that everybody has wellbeing needs, and everybody's needs are different. So for any organization to put, I mean, this may be obvious, I guess, but for any organization to put things in place, they need to respond to the diversity of issues and needs that people have. But
it needs to be somehow individualized.
Yeah, absolutely. It needs to be individualized. And I think when thinking about how to create these interventions, you need to think about centering them around those with lived experience first, and then they, in theory, those approaches then may be inclusive for everyone. Working with the most kind of the people that potentially are at most risk from re-traumatization. I think some of the findings about people with lived experience were around having almost too much knowledge of the system, so that there's that possibility of being re-triggered or re-traumatized, but also that the boundaries can be really difficult to maintain. Because people would service users may identify with them, then they feel that there's a greater sense of duty to support people who are in similar circumstances, and this can lead to overwork, burnout, and those really blurred boundaries. I think so. You can probably go into more kind of detail around that.
Yeah, and what this makes me think, I mean, what this in particular, what you're saying in particular is making me think is that, first of all, any work around creating awareness about secondary traumatization as well, and the need of a personalized, meaningful self-care strategies are related to the fact that people that have gone through in this particular sector, people that have gone through the migration process, they are supporting people that are, let's say, new in the country and just starting with the process. But that will, and I'm wondering, about this idea of being an expert through the experience. I think there is that concept floating around somewhere, no? In terms of how a experience gives you a sort of a higher level of empathy, or a stronger views about the situation and so on, but at the same time has its risks, in the sense of, as you were saying, boundaries and probably having lots of assumptions. I think one of the answers to that issue may be related to the fact that, although we are talking about people that are going through the migration system, let's say everybody going through the same kind of process in principle, the experience and the way that each individual will be having the strengths and the tools from their previous life as well, to go through that process and to have different levels of resilience as well, to go through this situation. That makes it so particular and so individualized, because in the end, it will be all down to the resilience that each individual has been able to develop. And we are talking here about their history from the moment they were born, and how those experiences from early childhood and after are helping them to be the person that they are now, with their strengths and their vulnerabilities, and how that then will position them in certain places to be able to provide this support to others, talking about the same kind of experiences.
Absolutely. I think if we can maintain kind of that resilience and kind of strength-based approach that having kind of lived experience brings, then it's incredibly powerful.
It can be, yes.
We, in parallel to this, thinking about kind of removing barriers to power and anti-racism, and having a very kind of white sector, and what that means around kind of creating a more equitable sector and representation.
Absolutely.
At all different levels, and which I think is really important. But in order for it to be done safely and well, they need to really think about what needs to be in place to create the kind of sector where people can thrive in terms of service users, but also the people working in the sector.
Exactly.
So we need to kind of really figure out how we maintain kind of resilience, and we support people to maintain their resilience and strength, and bring kind of all of that experience to kind of grow and nourish the sector and the service users, so that we're creating kind of a really positive experience for people.
Exactly.
But how to do that in the current context is incredibly challenging.
Yes.
In order, I think, to be able to really kind of create something which is which transcends it, we really need support from funders, and we really need to work together to almost create kind of like new prototypes or new patterns or something around how we can bring more joy, or how we can bring hope, so
Yes.
continue to bring hope, to
Yeah.
maintain to actually improve wellbeing rather than maintain it, because at the moment I think it is quite low.
Yeah. And it's about reducing anxiety, preventing burnout in the end, no? And so it's a work that I'm hearing that it is a work that need to be done by the individual, but also needs to be done by the system and the organizations and so on. We're talking about a systemic problem here. What would you say? Do you feel that we have covered the ideas of the findings of the project?
I think in terms of the main findings, we've spoken
Yes.
about everyone having individual needs,
Yes.
especially thinking about those with lived experience and their needs, and the need for responses to be individual and inclusive when organizations build them. We've also talked about kind of the unique elements of the sector.
Yes.
That means in terms of extra pressures to maintain well-being. And the third main finding from the report was around needing to work together. So the way that the project was structured was that there was desktop research, 18 interviews, and then there were 2 workshops to pull together the findings. Findings were pulled together, and then they were played back in workshops to all the kind of participants and interviewees. And one of the main things that was reflected was how much value there was in people coming together and people feeling reassured that they weren't alone in this problem, and that it wasn't that they were incapable of doing their job, that the problem was much wider than this, and how important that is. And also, so I think on that basic human level, having your experiences validated, and feeling a bit of the sense of community, even if it's a community in the sense that people know that things aren't going very well, and that idea that sharing any experience can alleviate kind of the pressure or the effect that has on the individual. But also the thing about coming together was that we also talked about what interventions people were putting in place that were working, and organizations really thought that opportunity to come together to kind of almost steal each other's ideas, really powerful, because otherwise we can sometimes be working in a vacuum, reinventing the wheel, where actually this is an issue for everyone. How can we collaborate to kind of support each organization, to support each other, to build better practices? So that really came out. So an opportunity not only to create some spaces for people to come together at different levels to think about implementing better wellbeing practices, but also an opportunity to kind of build almost like a shared toolkit, so build kind of better resources which are open and shared for people to use to implement in their own organizations. And I think one of the findings reflected is that this is really useful for small organizations as well, that don't have that much resource, or don't have development teams or staff that might be working on policies, to be able to kind of have this resource shared, because they're so much more stretched across kind of the different things that they need to do to keep an organization running. So those are the 3 main kind of findings, or the findings that came up most frequently.
Yeah, interesting. So how togetherness comes to mind, not the word togetherness, how important it is to have those reflective spaces, the think together kind of concept idea, no, how we can share as well experience, and to highlight what works, Because in the end, as you were saying, we are all so busy. Every organization is so busy focusing on their needs and what they have to do. And the staff, the frontline workers are so busy in that place of in between their organizations and the clients that are, or service users that are, really having to focus their energy and their attention into a very single problem sometimes, and there is this notion of firefighting persistently, and there is very little space to walk, to take a little bit of distance, to take a step back, to gain a perspective and say, okay, what's happening? How are we doing? What can be done differently? How am I feeling? What's going on here? Let's think together. What works? What doesn't work? What we are doing that you have not done that could be useful for your group, and so on, no? And how we replicate in that way more than anything, because we know. And it's interesting because you make me think about Judith Herman developed the stage approach to work with trauma, and she just have a new book now. I started to read the other day. I've just written a few pages of it, and she's talking about the need of dealing with trauma in a community. As a community, how reparative that can be. And I think it brings to mind, the importance of that reflective spaces as well, and the sense of togetherness, to know that we are not alone, because we need to, as individuals, I think it's important for everyone to know that you are listened, that you're understood, that there is someone else out there. It could be a friend, it could be a colleague, it could be another organization, understanding where you're coming from, and that gives validation to the experience as well, that every organization is going through. So interesting.
And I think there's something about it's connecting that clinical supervision with potentially like what happens within an organization, within your team, how you support each other. But for some organizations, there's also the power of that meeting across organizations.
Yes.
A different approach.
Yes.
But also because sometimes of the politics of internal organizations.
Exactly.
There may not be somebody who's doing quite the same role as you or something like that. So finding, and I guess that's one benefit from the pandemic, is finding kind of people and peers in online spaces can be really powerful.
Yes.
For kind of supporting each other through crises.
And somehow the fact that we are working, the fact that we are working, we can be in this very moment here, because we are. Where are you? You are in the UK, but where are you?
I'm in Leeds.
There you go. You see, and I'm in London. So so this communication, it has been facilitated enormously, and so it's a good potential there as well. What do you think will be next? What's next after the delivery of this project, and what's next, the next steps?
So I guess we came out with kind of the main needs, and then derived from that we kind of worked to think about what we might want to see come out of the report, because things obviously the organization said is they didn't want another research report that doesn't lead anywhere, and is just done for the sake of it. So 3 kind of main recommendations came out of the project.
Okay.
One being that you can figure out how to work together to co-develop a framework of support around well-being, or a kind of toolkit, which would be kind of like a number of different kind of policies and practices that organizations could look at and take what they needed or wanted, because I think some organizations have pretty good well-being practices in place and can share those to support others. So that was one idea that came out. Another one, I think, is just that we continue to network and influence and figure out how to, I suppose, primarily because the sector works with, relies on trust and foundations to
Uh-huh.
an extent, is to work with funders to figure out how to make sure that when they are looking at applications, that wellbeing is embedded into them, but also think about the systemic issue of funding, that
Yes.
one of the main issues for people in the sector
Mm-hmm.
is around financial worries.
Yes.
Often projects are granted on short-term basis, so how do we make sure that funding is longer term, and also that organizations aren't putting in bids which are kind of over ambitious, which end up leading to burnout as well,
Uh-huh.
gain funding. I mean, that's just obviously a massive systemic issue, but it has such an impact on well-being.
Yes.
I think the last thing we talked about was building a support platform online which could kind of hold all of the materials and research and different support offerings from different therapists
Mm-hmm.
together, that people can access easily, and somehow this kind of support platform being sector owned rather than organizational owned, with a kind of steering group. So those were the three main next steps that came out of the report.
Mm-hmm. And there is an amazing, a fantastic tool for everybody to access, no? With the Let's Be Well page.
Hopefully.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic to have one place, because many people, we struggle to where do I find information? We talk a lot about well-being, what can be done, how to do it. We do this research and these projects, and we come up with all fantastic ideas, but I think on the one side is the how. The big question is how. How do we go about, for organizations to initiate, just to do one initial step? How an individual can start or identify that very first thing that will be consciously do to start to improve their own well-being. So we tend to be in this should be this should be this way, or people, I hear a lot of people saying I should be doing this and that and the other, because we get bombarded with lots of information about well-being and why this and that is helpful and so on, which is important in terms of information. But I think it's easy to be inundated with information but not to know where to get started. That's why I find that Let's Be Well is such a good resource, because it gives those elements, that starting point. Go there, and the invitation is for everybody that works in the sector, to go to the page. Do you want to tell us a little bit more the details of the Let's Be Well page?
Yeah, so we've used some remaining resource we have left from a lottery funded project to work with a designer to kind of put this site together.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea is that it's open, that people can contribute to it if they want to, and that people can kind of use it as a resource to think about well-being in their organizations, and
Mm-hmm.
to access, and to almost, there's a list of many different well-being providers that work with organizations in the sector.
Mm-hmm.
People are thinking about finding some training or some coaching, or needing some clinical supervision, or want some inspiration from what other organizations are doing.
Mm-hmm.
There's a couple of pages that would be useful for them. So one is a directory of different therapists and organizations providing support, and another is a page of case studies from people either who lead or work in organizations talking about their wellbeing journeys, or from some professionals talking about some of the programs or projects they facilitate.
Uh-huh.
And hopefully that will be meaningful for people. to access.
Yes.
I think that the first step, I guess, for organizations is that, I think, and you've talked about it, is that self-awareness and recognition that it is an
Yes.
issue that needs to be addressed.
Mm-hmm.
But each organization needs to have their own kind of response to what
Definitely.
works for them. And I think the point of the site is that it gives so many kind of different options in terms of support that that people can piece together what works for them.
Absolutely.
I mean, it needs, in order for it to be an incredible site, it would need more investment, and it needs more. The toolkit isn't really developed in terms of, oh, you're an organization, think about this first, or this could be a pathway or anything like that. That would require more investment, but it is the beginning of an offering
Absolutely.
that could be developed by the sector to be more meaningful and useful.
Yeah, but definitely represents a first step, which is fantastic. It's a call for action. And it means to facilitate as well that first step, that call for action for the organizations as well. And I'm pleased to say that Mind Your Mind podcast is also in the resources of Let's Be Well. And I'm grateful for that, because the intention is to get to as many frontline workers as possible, because we are together in this mission to make well-being something central and to ensure that people are taking care of themselves in order to continue caring for others, because that's the whole essence of this work. No, there is such an immense group of very committed people within the organizations, the NGOs, but all the charity sector, but also in different areas, working to reduce social inequality, so it's important for me to bring into that equation. Self-care is important and is essential for achieve some change, social change. So
it's still really stigmatized, isn't it? So
absolutely,
I
yes.
think probably the more we can advertise that this is something that is happening, and I think about the language that's being used.
Yes.
And there's so much work that could be done with people with lived experience and learned experience in the sector to figure out how to make it kind of reach people that think that either they cannot prioritize well-being because they need to focus on service users, and it's not to actually spend some time thinking about looking after yourself. It's kind of it's too indulgent. I think
yes,
we kind of address that issue is important, because otherwise everybody will be overworking and potentially kind of leading to burnout. I think that's really important.
Absolutely, I 100% agree with you. And I mean, English for me is my second language, and I struggle sometimes to find, the words to say this is important, because there is a value attached to the idea of self-care, as you just said, of being self-indulgent. And actually, the hashtag of this podcast is selfish is kind, because there is a paradox there. No, the paradox is that the only way that you can move forward in doing what you want to be doing, in supporting others in this sector, is by taking care of yourself. And always the analogy, I think I did talk about this in the first episode of this podcast, that the analogy of the oxygen mask. But someone the other day, having a conversation, gave me another fantastic analogy. Everybody has a Hoover, right? If you have a Hoover and you are cleaning your house, the container of the Hoover needs to be emptied. Otherwise, you will not be able to carry on doing the cleaning of your house. It needs to be emptied.
That's
And
a great everyday analogy. I love it.
simply the Hoover will stop working if you don't empty it. It's exactly the same. I was so grateful for that, because it's so true. It's exactly that needs to be a place where you replenish, you know, really allow that restorative moments, and that will help you to be in the best possible place you can be, to contain the pain of the other person that you are trying to support. That's the very essence of the work that we are doing here in this podcast, to try to bring that notion into everybody's mind that is there in the front line.
Yeah, and Audrey Lorde spoke about it, didn't she? About self-care being an act of political warfare. So
Yes.
I guess it's like bringing, it's kind of repeating those messages and legitimizing them by kind of by saying this is what's being seen. So there is the research here. These are the issues.
Yes.
This is potentially what we could do. We need to do it. And if we do it, then we will be able to work better and provide better support.
Yes, and Saira Khan as well was saying a few episodes ago that this is our act of defiance. Take care of ourselves is our act of defiance, to be able to reach that change, that social change. Thank you so very much. We are reaching sort of the end of today's episode. And always at the end of the episode, I call for ideas for actions, you know, and I would like to ask you if you have any suggestions or any actions that you would like to invite either organizations or people to do. And yeah, I just want to invite that call for action. What will be yours?
I think there's many. I suppose it's that to read the report.
Yes,
kind of
definitely.
Like think about the findings, think about the meanings that it has for you. Get in touch if you're interested. Potentially, like if you have things to share them, and we can put them on the website. So I think this is a collective journey. So reach out, I guess, and know that you're not alone. I guess that everyone is experiencing these issues, but together we can do some things about it.
Absolutely. Thank you so very much, Pascale. Just to say as well that we will ensure to have the link of the report in the description of this episode, so people can go as well to the description of this episode and find it there as a useful resource. And thank you so very much. If you are listening this episode, please share it. Help us to help by sharing this podcast, and we will be back soon. And thank you so very much, Pascale. I'm sure we will carry on seeing each other, because we are so enthusiastic about this work that I'm sure our paths will cross again. So see you soon, and thank you for today.
Thank you so much, Roxana. It's been wonderful.
See you soon. Bye.